Hey everyone, today I'm going to do a deep dive into RomVault's directory settings and show you what each of the different options do. So RomVault's directory settings are basically a way to map your DAT root, which just kind of outlines how you're organizing your DATs, um, to your actual file system of where your ROMs are actually stored. So one of the main purposes of the directory rules is to map certain DATs to different directories, like a different drive for a large set that you can't fit where all your other ROMs are. It also helps you control the different ways of storing your sets. So whether it's uncompressed, zipped, 7-zipped, merged, unmerged, etc. So the settings can be accessed either through the top menu up here under Settings, Directory Settings, or they can be accessed through the right-click context menu from any branch in the tree. The global view, they're the exact same thing. They're the exact same window, only the global view shows you a mapping table of all of your rules. So you can browse through and see how each of your different rules is configured. So if you want to add a new rule, you should select it from the tree. So let's take a look at our root level rule up here. So one thing to note is that directory rules cascade. So if I set a rule here, and let's say I set my archive type as zip and override dat, what this will do is that setting will apply to all the descendants in the tree until I override it with a higher priority rule. So for example, if I crack open rain and I want to store that as file instead of zip, well, that's going to override this zip archive type since this is a descendant and I have a higher priority rule underneath. So let's just review our root level rule here. So there's a few different naming options which I already covered in the organizing DATs video, such as this don't add, auto add directories, and use description instead of name. So if you're interested in the different naming conventions and how directories are named, then check out that video for a lot more details. The archive type setting, this is pretty self-explanatory. This just basically allows you to specify, do you want to store everything uncompressed in zips or in 7-zip archives. Now, whenever RomVault writes a zip or 7-zip archive, it's going to normalize the content into either torrent zip format or RV7-zip format. And there's some benefits to this because it allows some of RomVault's operations to move extremely quickly and raw copy data instead of recompressing whenever it can. This override DAT checkbox here, what this does is it basically disregards any instructions in the DAT for a specific archive type, and RomVault will apply whatever you say instead of whatever the DAT says. So there are some DATs that basically say like force packing unzip in the header, which basically means store as file, but you might disagree with that and you might want to store it as zip anyway. So you can override the DAT with this little checkbox here. And the same applies to merge settings. So for our overall rule, I like to work from general to specific, where I have my root level rule control how I want to store things for most cases. So in this case, I want most everything to be zip, and if I ever want to override it, I'll just do that with a different rule. So this looks good to me. I'll just hit apply. Now let's take a look at rules specific to rain. So if I set this directory rule here, I can see that the merge type is set to nothing. Well, I can change this merge type to something else. So let's say I want to use merged instead. I can just go ahead and select merged and hit apply, and it will apply it accordingly. Now, if you're not familiar with the different merge settings are, there's a great wiki page on this, on the RomVault wiki, under the merge types page over here. So you can either pause the video and take a quick look at this, or just review it at your leisure. So let's go ahead and change my rain setup from whatever the default was to merged instead, because I want fewer files. Go ahead and hit apply. Now we can see that there's a lot of changes detected in order to get things into the proper state. Let's just do find fixes, fix ROMs, and we can see RomVault is going through and repacking everything accordingly. So I have a merge set now instead of a unmerged set. Now you can also see in this fixing log that there's a lot of actions that show raw. This is one of those benefits of torrent zip. So instead of actually recompressing archives, it's actually copying the raw data from one archive to another. So it's actually not recompressing at all. So that's how it can go very, very fast. So let's take a look at some of the other options we have here. So in this case, with rain, we only have ROMs, so this option here isn't really going to do much. But for MAME, you might want to only include ROMs or only include CHDs. But most of the time, this is just set as ROMs and CHDs. The header type, this is useful for things like NES, where basically all emulators require headered ROMs. So you may only want to collect headered ROMs, in which case you can just select headered instead. What this will do is it will enforce RomVault only matching on headered ROMs instead of headerless. So RomVault's really the only application that can do this to prevent that commingling. So that's a pretty useful little feature there if you're using a DAT that has hashes of the headerless ROMs, yet you want to collect only headered. Okay, let's take a look at another example. So let's go to Atari 2600. Let's set some directory rules here. So in this case, with Atari, I have a bunch of ROMs here, but let's just say this is not a system that I really care to play. I just want to archive these ROMs. What you can do is you can use this single archive setting to pack all of these ROMs together in a single archive. So let's watch what happens. There's a few different options here. Add subdirs will basically pack everything in an archive with each game in its own subdirectory. No subdirs will pack everything together, but without a subdirectory. If there's a naming conflict, what it'll do is it'll append a unique identifier, like an _0, _1, etc., to the end of the ROM name to avoid naming conflicts. Add subdirs if conflicts. This will basically evaluate all of the game names, and if there are any conflicts, any file naming conflicts, it will put them in subdirs according to the game name. And then add subdirs if multiple ROMs. This one is really useful for situations like PlayStation 3, where let's say you want to store it uncompressed because PS3 ISOs don't compress very well. And you know that the redump PS3 set contains both ISOs and some CD-based games or disks that are just bin and queue. So what this will do is this will store all the ISOs at the root directory, like PS3, your PS3 ROMs directory, but any of the disk-based games, like the CD-based games, will be packed in subdirectories with the name of the game. So the bin and queues will be bundled together into their own subdirectories. So a very useful little setting there. But let's go ahead and make this for our 2600 set. So let's say I want to pack up 2600 with no subdirs. Let's go ahead and hit apply. You'll notice there's a bunch of changes because I'm going from individual zips to one big zip. Let's do find fixes, fix ROMs, and that was near instant, but basically it raw copied everything into a single zip file now. And we could see that we have this Atari 2600 zip with all the games within it. So this is very useful for sets that you want to archive as well. So for example, let's say you typically use no intro sets for your front end, but you want to collect TOSEC anyway. Well, you can use this setting for TOSEC, and it will just pack everything up, so that way you don't have millions of files. You might just have a couple hundred, one for each DAT. Pretty cool. So let's see what else is available. So another thing that you can do is, for no intro DATs in particular, all no intro games have a unique ID associated with them, and some old school collectors may prefer this naming convention. So here you can see all of these are now numbered if I choose that setting. Not many people will use that, but it's there just in case you like that. I can exclude file names as well. So for example, if there is a particular file I want to ignore, like let's say I like to keep my own notes with my ROMs in like a notes file. Let's just put something in this. Now this file is personal to you. This might be just your own thing, but it's not in the DAT. So under normal circumstances, the DAT would want to remove this file because it's not needed. So you can always add in an ignore here, and it will ignore it accordingly. So let's go ahead and scan and watch what happens. So here you'll see this is unknown, but needs to be fixed. So let's do find fixes. Oh, I think I had a typo. Yep, forgot the S. Notes. All right, find fixes. See, now it shows up as this ignore status, which basically just means it won't be removed. So if I do find fixes, fix ROMs, nothing really happens. It basically just ignored that file instead of wanting to delete it, which is good. All right, what else can we do? So one pretty cool feature that is unique to RomVault's 360 and above is the ability to prevent incomplete sets. So if we go here, let's check. Actually, let's check this up here. So if we think back to one of our earlier examples, let's just find this, fix ROMs. Okay. So under normal circumstances, RomVault will try to use every ROM available to build a set, even if it means that set is going to be incomplete. So in cases with like CD-based games, you might only collect USA-based games, but you're using a redump queue pack, which means it will create a bunch of archives that you don't care about, which are basically just either random tracks or just a queue file. Now this isn't ideal, because this means if you're trying to actually use this in a front end or something, it's going to basically be a useless archive, because you can't just load a queue. It's not going to do anything if you don't have any other tracks with it. So what you can do is you can prevent this. So in the directory settings, under advanced options, you can choose to only keep complete sets. And when you do this, you will notice that if you do find fixes now, it's going to want to remove all the files that would result in an incomplete set. So in this case here, let's do fix ROMs, and we can notice all those junk queues that I didn't want are now moved out to my to sort directory, and I'm just left with this this one complete game here, which is fantastic. So now this is much more suitable for loading into a front end or an emulator. So going back to this here, those are the main options for controlling the way that you want your set stored. But let's say you have a really large set, like PlayStation 2 or something, and it won't fit on your main drive where your other ROMs are, and you want to remap that to somewhere else. Well, we can do that as well. So let's go ahead and let's say Sega CD can't fit. So let's go ahead and set these directory settings. Let's add a new path, and let's just put this under games, big games or something. Let's just assume this is a separate, separate USB drive or network drive or something where you store, all your big stuff. So if you hit apply, you'll notice nothing changed. The reason for that is because the way RomVault stores references to your ROMs is actually based off of the path as shown in the DAT root. But what happens now, if I scan again, you'll notice that it tried to scan, it reached this directory here, but instead of scanning my redump Sega CD folder, it instead jumped over to the Y drive to scan the content there. So that's good, that makes sense, but we have a bit of a problem here because now I have this orphaned game sitting in the old location that RomVault can no longer access because the directory rule is telling it to go somewhere else. So the way you can resolve this if you ever run into this issue is just go in here and just rename this to something else. Let's just call this Sega CD 2. Now I can scan my ROMs, and you'll notice this gets picked up now. So now RomVault can actually access it. Now from here, I can do find fixes and then fix ROMs, and it will move the content to its proper location. So that's just something to look out for. We've seen people get tripped up by that. So if you do run into that issue, just be mindful that anything you've already scanned is in reference to the DAT root path. So if you're kind of changing where a particular DAT points to out from under, the file system, then, you can run into these little orphaned, sort of issues like that. But very easy to resolve. Again, just something to look out for. So let's just double check and see if there's anything else. So we covered just about everything in here. So yeah, that's about it. Those are directory rules, and they're very flexible. Just keep in mind that they cascade, and any directory rule is overwritten with a higher priority directory rule deeper in the tree. And if you need more information about this, there's a good visual on the RomVault wiki under the directory rules page over here, where we kind of outline what these different rules do and how the rules cascade. So if you need a visual reference to different ways that you can set stuff up, this is a good point of reference. There's also a good diagram on the where is it? On the organizing DATs page as well. So we go here under beginner tutorials, organizing DATs. You can see a visual of kind of how you might use these different directory rules to map your DAT root to your ROM directories here. So in this example here, you might have a main games directory, and then you have like redump stuff on a different drive, etc. So they're very flexible. Feel free to play around with it. The best way to learn it is just by tinkering with it and seeing what the different options do. But overall, adds a great deal of flexibility, and yeah, enjoy.